they have no real styles and they have no real titles. Elizabeth only has colour of law styles. That is, she has no titles. Titles belong to the Crown, and her styles are colour of law. That is, that we think she's got styles like Her Majesty the Queen, but she doesn't. She has no styles at all. All of her real styles and titles were removed off her on the 26th of March 1953. And they were removed from the 26th of March 1953 to the 26th of May 1953, which is 61 days. And that was done to mark the days as years, so 61 days and 61 years, to mark the end times. And there's only two real monarchs, king or queen, that you get in a long year period, which is 1979 to 2160 years. So let's call it at every 2,000 years. You only get a true monarch, king or queen, so let's say king at the moment. So you only get a true king every 2,000 years. And in between, you get the descendants of those kings, and they define their kingship by, how shall I define my kingship? And because they have no direction and they're not really the true kings. So what the true king does is they represent the end times and the new age. And the end times is a 40-day period of probation. When this is all out of the dictionary symbols in the Bible, and this is all defined stuff. It's a 40-day period of probation for a larger kingdom for longer. So we had that about 2,000 years ago, and that was represented by John the Baptist, Jesus, and the Marys. And that changed over from the Old Testament to the New Testament. And the mark of the end times New Age changeover is betrayal. Right? And betrayal is something you can't fake and you don't really want to go through. But that's the mark. So what happened this time is we had the end times New Age changeover was just so I can point. The end times New Age changeover was the 40 days from the 7th of July to the 16th of August 2014. It's a 40-day period of probation. And then the New Age started on the 16th of August 2014 to the 25th of September. That's the second 40-day period. So that's the end times, or the end of time, and the New Age. Now in 962, the Holy Roman Emperor Otto met with Pope John XII, and they agreed that the Holy Roman Emperor represents the crown and the Pope represents the law, and that they would meet at the end of time. And the end of time is the end times. So we're looking at the period between the 7th of July and the 16th of August 2014 being the time when the Crown and the law meet. Now the Hidden King of England books expose the British royal family as fake usurpers, and their role was just to fill in until the end times. And those books came through Faro in the Algarve on their way to me on this day, 16th of August 2014. And the books talk about the crown and the law, and how the crown is fake and the crown is separate from the Queen. And the crown owns the real styles and titles of Elizabeth. So what happened is you've got the Priority Sion, which is the top of the cult, and every other organisation below that is controllable through the occult, like the banks and Parliament and Temple Bar, etc. So I didn't sleep last night. So if I have a pause where I'm going, what the hell am I talking about? Just yell out what I talked about. What's happened is you've got the Crown, the Temple Bar owns the Crown, and Silent Weapons for a Quiet War owns Temple Bar, the London Gazette, published by authority, and the newsletter, which is, what is that? Here. Silent Weapons for a Quiet War took over Earth in 1953, the same year as Elizabeth's coronation. It wasn't Elizabeth's coronation, it's actually called Coronation Day, and she just sat on top of a wooden chair in Westminster Abbey with the stone spoon, or the coronation stone, removed on Christmas Day, 4 AM 1950. So she wasn't crowned that day. She's not the Queen. She's not Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor. She's Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Mountbatten, and Mountbatten means illegitimate royal. Right, so we've got Elizabeth sitting on top of a wooden seat in Westminster on Coronation Day, and it's not her coronation. And she's had all of her titles removed from the 26th of March to the 26th of May 1953, and her coronation is a week later on the 2nd of June 1953. But they didn't give her styles and titles back, the real ones. They sat her on a wooden chair in Westminster without the coronation stone, and people assumed that she was the Queen. Right? And people assume that the crown is the crown hat, but the crown is in Temple Bar, and the throne is the crown hat. Right? So she's kind of sitting on the throne, but she's done it under a fake identity. So to get married and divorced under a fake identity, it's like this, it's just all fake. It's all colour of law stuff. So what the London Gazette did, what Silent Weapons for Quiet War did, is they took over Earth and they declared war on the human population of Earth in 1953, and they used Elizabeth to do that. Silent Weapons for a Quiet War owns the London Gazette, published by authority, registered as a newspaper, God Save the Queen, Her Majesty's Stationery Office, and the Stationery Office. And what they did with Elizabeth's, the proclamation of Elizabeth is you're legally allowed to backdate a document. You can backdate legal documents. Lawyers don't really like to talk about it, but they just do it all the time. But you can't backdate a proclamation or a treaty, and this is a proclamation. So Elizabeth has made a proclamation on the 28th of May from the court of Buckingham Palace that she's the Queen, and it's called by the Queen. But the Queen's in capital letters, which makes it ancient Latin glossa, so that's not legal. And then she's got a proclamation, and that's in all caps as well, so that's ancient Latin glossa, which means it's removed off the page. And then she's written Elizabeth R, and the Elizabeth is in italics, all caps italics, which means it's ancient Latin, legally ambiguous. Italics means legally ambiguous. And then she's written R dot, and R dot means royal, regnant, or regina. In fact, Elizabeth is not R dot, she's just R. And you're allowed to use the letter R if you've been on a royal tour. So when her house father, I have no idea what volume is. Master. Yeah, that's it. Is that? Where were we? On the art. Oh yeah, on the art. So what happened when George VI, her house father, King George VI was actually a legitimate son of King George V, but George VI was not the siren father of Elizabeth, and George VI did not adopt Elizabeth. So people assumed that Elizabeth was George VI's daughter, but they looked nothing alike. So George VI never adopted Elizabeth. And Elizabeth II stands for Elizabeth. Okay, is that there? So Elizabeth II actually stands for Elizabeth II born. Okay. Not the second Queen Elizabeth, it's Elizabeth II born. And when George VI was ill and looked like he was dying, whenever he looked like he was dying, Elizabeth would go on a tour, like of Canada or Africa, so that when George died, she could use the letter R, which means Royal Tour. Right? So, what you've got here in this document is a whole lot of glossa. You've got a whole lot of capital letters, and you've got large letters, and you've got italics, and you've got underline, and then you've got standard text, and then you've got subclauses, and quotes within quotes within quotes. And in a short form, it goes like this. 11th Supplement 2 is in all caps. It doesn't relate to the London Gazette. 11th Supplement 2 relates to of Tuesday, May. The 2 here relates to the 953, which is subscript. The 1 here is actually a Roman I. Right, so that doesn't actually give the date 1953, it gives the date I, 1953. And the 2 and the 6 are a completely different font size, so they don't relate together. Published by authority is in Lucinda black letter, so it's kind of italic. That's a glossa, so that it's actually removed off the page, and when you look at it, you can see that it's completely separate from the rest of the stuff. Registered as a newspaper, it's got 2 lines under it, which means here. So registered as a newspaper, it's got 2 lines in front of it. There. So when you underline, it means there's nothing after it, right? You put a line under a period. So registered as a newspaper negates everything else. And then at the bottom you've got separate God Save the Queen. And the way they've set it up is that by the silent witness for quiet war is that only God can save the Queen. You've got a subclause here, colon, creates a subclause after it. So you've got a subclause there, colon, subclause there, colon, subclause here. Whenever you've got a subclause of a subclause of a subclause, it's a moot point. So they're saying that it's a moot point what's happening down here. And when you inset a paragraph, that's the equivalent of a quote. And when you inset a first line, that's the equivalent of a quote. And when you put speech marks around it, that's the equivalent of a quote. So here you've got a quote within a quote within a quote. So what you've actually got is a moot point, quote within a quote within a quote is a hearsay. So we've actually got as a moot point hearsay of Elizabeth's titles. So Elizabeth's titles are only colour of law. Right? And this is the way it reads. Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, of the, that's one quote. And then a quote within that is United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland and of other realms and territories Queen, comma, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith.
Very accurate.
So, Elizabeth II, by the grace of God. By the grace of God is...
Is that coming?
I can't hear anything from... You know? Yep. Okay, right. How about that? No. Okay. So, Elizabeth II, by the grace of God. By the grace of God translates as through the eye of a needle. So she became colour of law queen through the eye of a needle. And whenever you've got a suffix, like
You've got Sir John Brown, and then you've got John Brown Sir. It's completely different, right? So where you've got Elizabeth II of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Queen, she's a suffix queen, right? And a suffix means delinquent. It means she hasn't yet found her place in society. So you have a delinquent queen with colour of law styles, right? That through the eye of a needle. No styles at all. So, and then you've got head of the Commonwealth, and the Commonwealth ended, it went from 1949 to 1st of July 1959. So after the 1st of July 1959, Elizabeth's titles were redundant. And then you've got Defender of the Faith. And Defender of the Faith means, well, the requirement to be a Defender of the Faith is you can't have a surname or a title. Right? So by putting Defender of the Faith there, it's saying that they're actually talking about the Queen's styles, not her titles, because the Crown owns all of the titles. And the Crown, which includes Temple Bars and the banks and the British Empire government that took over India and countries in Africa, etc., and used the Crown seal, so the banks and their agents owned the Crown titles and the Crown styles which they used. Elizabeth never used them, the monarchs never used them, but especially Elizabeth. So when you've got a title Queen as a suffix, not a prefix, as a suffix, it means she's delinquent. And she's delinquent because she is illegitimate, and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is bankrupt. And it was bankrupt after World War II for at least a couple of decades, right? So Elizabeth is the queen of a bankrupt something, nation. Actually, she's the queen of possibly the queen of a bankrupt national identity. Now, if she was legitimate and the country was solvent, she would be queen of the land and the people of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and all Ireland. Instead, she is, by the grace of God, through the eye of the needle, we're going to sneak you through this one, of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland and of our other realms and territories queen. She's a suffix queen, so she's illegitimate, a bankrupt nation. She's not the queen of the people, and she's not the queen of the land. And she was stripped of all titles on the 26th of March 1953 for 61 days to the 26th of May 1953. And that 61 days was designed to mark 61 years from 1953 to 2014, which is the end times. So they knew about the end times in 1953. And the end times is when the true king comes along, and that's the person selected to represent the end times. And there's often two people selected to represent the end times, and then there's a betrayal, and then there's one person that survives and represents the New Age. And that's the New Age king, or the king of the New Age. Right? And that might sound a bit like Mary Fairy, but it ain't. When you think about it, because Elizabeth is not the queen of the people of the United Kingdom, and she's not the queen of the land of the United Kingdom, and she's a suffix queen of a bankrupt nation, and she's illegitimate, and she's got no real styles or titles. She's got the colour of law. And the way they did it, so I'll see if there's... Yeah, so what they did is, see, here's Elizabeth here. 28th of May, it's recorded in our court of Buckingham Palace, and our means we, and we is Elizabeth and Silent Witness Required War, who were extorting Elizabeth along with Prince Philip on the basis that Elizabeth was illegitimate. So that's the 28th of May there, and it's published on the 29th of May by the London Gazette, and it's the 11th supplement to the London Gazette. Here's the first supplement to the London Gazette, and it's published 3 days later on the 1st of June. It's the second supplement of the London Gazette, published on the 1st of June. And she was the 11th supplement, published 3 days earlier, on the 29th of May. So what's happened is that Silent Weapons for a Quiet War have taken over the London Gazette, and the London Gazette the London Gazette has fraudulently inserted Elizabeth's proclamation after the 1st of June and backdated it as though it was 29th of May or earlier. So she has backdated her proclamation, which is not lawful, and that's been done to confirm that Elizabeth is just a colourful queen. And it also means that everyone who's sworn an oath to the Queen has committed, or has been a party to a connivance fraud. Right? And the London Gazette is a fraud, is a connivance, fraud and forgery. Right? It was the status. Can you hear me there? Can you hear me there? I can't. So the London Gazette, was considered sort of the legal publication, but it's actually a fraud. Right? So these guys won't publish my titles, which is actually a good thing, because as not having my titles published, I can actually be a defender of the faith with titles later. So it's actually kind of a blessing. So here's the third supplement, fourth supplement. This is all 10 supplements published on the 1st of June, 3 days after Elizabeth's supplement. So these are the real ones. And then there's Elizabeth there, 29th of May, and she's the 11th supplement, 3 days earlier. Yeah. And then that's supported by the regular army, Central Chancery, Knighthoods, and the Council Chambers of Whitehall. So they were all complicit with Elizabeth's fraud. So that's Elizabeth's proclamation closer up, and here's her titles here given by Wikipedia, which is also owned and controlled by Silent Weapons for a Quiet War. So from when George VI died, it was on New Zealand Day. George VI died on New Zealand Day, and Elizabeth is called Elizabeth II. Elizabeth II.
That's not a name card.
Yeah. Elizabeth II means Elizabeth II born, and George VI, firstborn, was actually born in New Zealand. So whether George VI actually died on the 6th of February, or they actually named him as dead on the 6th of February, was to mark that the firstborn of George VI was born in New Zealand, and it was Elizabeth Bowes Lyon's bodyguard who introduced her. No, actually, it was George VI and Elizabeth II's Sergeant Surgeon Doctor who introduced me to George VI's son in 1967. And they marked that occasion, it was July 1967, and they marked that occasion by changing the currency in New Zealand from British pounds and pence to New Zealand dollars and cents. And then they removed the crown out of the British currency because they recognised that the crown was actually in New Zealand. So then Elizabeth was named Elizabeth II born. And then of Great Britain, Ireland and the British Dominions beyond the seas Queen. She's Suffolk's Queen. And there's no comma there. So, the Queen, Queensland, Queenstown, Queensville are the British Dominions beyond the seas Queen. And then they put it in Latin, which is a big mistake because Latin is considered ancient Latin, and glossa removes the title off the page. And then on the 26th of March 1953, the titles are actually removed, but then Wikipedia is saying that she's then given her new titles, which is 2.5 months before her coronation. Why would she be given a title 2.5 months before a coronation? Yeah, it doesn't work. And then they add Her Majesty, right? But Her Majesty actually isn't in her titles and styles. And Her Majesty is written in italics, which means it's legally ambiguous. So what Wikipedia and some witness for Quiet War are telling you, they said Elizabeth's styles and titles, Her Majesty, is a fiction. It's legally ambiguous, right, to be removed off the page. It's absolute fiction that she is Her Majesty. Again, Elizabeth the Second born, by the grace of God, otherwise known as through the eye of the needle, of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. They've changed it from Ireland to Northern Ireland, and of her other realms and territories, Queen. She can't be Queen of her other realms and territories because she's not Queen of the first realm. Head of the Commonwealth, which ended in 1959, Defender of the Faith. She can't do that because she hasn't got styles and titles. Yeah. Start, right. Now, what is that? So here, there's about 30 or so countries that she is purportedly the Queen of, and I've just gone through and checked through all the countries, and every country has stuffed up the titles in some way to render them legally ambiguous. So in New Zealand, they call her Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, Queen of New Zealand and her other realms and territories. So she's a God Queen in New Zealand. She's a God Queen in New Zealand and Australia, and they started that in 1974. Right? Whenever you've got something ambiguous in a legal document, it renders that legal document of lesser import, right? Lesser importance, unimportant, right? So what they're actually telling you is that Elizabeth Styles as Queen, her titles as Queen, is unimportant, and that's because the Crown's owned by Temple Bar. So there's a Royal Styles and Titles Act, 1947, New Zealand. I actually prepared the slideshow yesterday, so yeah, here we go. So the name of the country is actually in here, yeah, in there, right? And anything that's underlined means that everything below it is not worth considering, right? So what it's actually saying in 1947 is the name of New Zealand is Onward, and then there's a symbol here. When you break it up, it's actually 140, right? But it's a cross with another diagonal on it, which makes it a 4, and the gap in the middle makes it a 0. So the name of New Zealand up until 1947 was Onward 140, and here's New Zealand here with double spacing in between. And whenever you've got double spacing, you've got a full stop. So you've got N dot, E dot, W dot, then you've got 5 spaces there, so it's dot, 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 dot. And then you've got Z dot, E dot, A dot, L dot, A dot, N dot. And then anything below the line, you ignore, right? So what it's saying is, do not analyse this, right? Now there's no crown here. Yeah, this is 1947, this is the New Zealand Royal Titles Act. So straight after World War II. There's no crown up here. The Queen has no feet. Right? Or this is a regina. It's like a representative of a sovereign. She's got a British flag. The Marigot here is showing his feet. And feet mean kingship. So he's standing with his feet spread. So that means that he's the king from coast to coast. Yeah. And he's got a taiaha, a stick here, and he's got one feather in his hat. It's one feather, right? And New Zealand's called Onward 140. It's actually a Templar symbol, so it's a 4, so it's Onward for Templars. Yeah, you might be able to see it there. It's Onward for Templars. Onward 4 cross, and there's the letters here JAM. Now, JAM appeared on the Georgia Guidestones. Remember, there's a cube stone between the English and Portuguese column, or English and Spanish column, more on the English side, and the top right corner. There's a cube cut out for about 18 months or so, and then there was a blank cube stone put in, and then there was a cube stone put in around the 7th of July 2014, and you can just read 2014. So there's another 4 sides that you couldn't see. And on the underside of the stone, it said JAM. Right? And here's JAM right here, written in 1947. Right? And for the occultists, 1947 is considered the same year as 1974. And the next time that the New Zealand Royal Titles Act was written was in 1974, and they used the codes from 1947. Right? So unless you really look at it, you're not going to get it. So I've just been really looking at it. So this here, what was I looking at? So what we've got one feather, we've got no crown, we've got the flag of St George and St Andrew, we've got 3 stars here and 1 bigger. So the biggest star is the Southern Star. And the red, no feet, and onward 4, and then New Zealand is underlined, so there's nothing below it. 2 Maori feet, so the Maori is the monarch. So the name of New Zealand is onward 140, and the name under here is N.E.W.Z.E. etc. Yeah? And that's in all caps. So it's ancient Roman, ancient Latin glossa. So here we've got JAM, which is the same as on the Georgia Guidestones, and we've got an L here. That means the legacy. It means Jesus and Mary legacy, but in the Georgia Guidestone, what they're actually saying was joint annual meeting. Yeah, right. So the Georgia Guidestone was marked JAM 2014 when it was pulled out on the 25th of September. It actually had the date 16/8/2014, which meant 16th of August 2014, which was the date of the changeover from the end times to the New Age. So it was marking the new king, true king. So after that, it was open slander to expose Elizabeth as a colour of law style, illegitimate, triple petard. And then you got the 2 eyes looking at you. So there we are. There's the Georgia Guidestones. So that says 16th of August 2014, and then 40 days later, which is a 40-day period of probation for the New Age, this stone was taken out, smashed into 4 people, and given to 4 people to take to the 4 corners of the earth. Just like they move these. So here you've got Queen Victoria. The kingship of the United Kingdom actually goes from Queen Victoria's firstborn legitimate son in 1834. Onward 140. So he's born in 1834. 140 years later is 1974. Days matched with years of 40 days of probation. At 40 years, 1974, you get 2014. In 1974, both New Zealand got its freedom, and then 78 days later, Portugal got its freedom in the Carnation Revolution, which was on the 25th of April 1974, which was the 140th anniversary of Prince Marcus Manuel's birth. And Marcus Manuel became King John II of England in 1869. So what they've done with this is they've actually marked the New Age again. That it would be, end times the New Age would be in 2014. So they really knew stuff. So the eyes have it.
Can you see the lettering? This is what I've just said is on there. You know, so 1952, new Queen proclaimed for UK. Princess Elizabeth has formally proclaimed herself Queen. Huh? I'll be the Queen, yeah, sure. I'm not going to do that. Princess Elizabeth has formally proclaimed herself Queen and head of the Commonwealth and defender of the faith. Seems pretty easy, really. Just go and, you know, just go and proclaim it yourself, and then London Gazette says okay. You know, instruct the London Gazette to publish it. Are you getting that the whole thing's a fraud? You can see that the whole thing is just like kindergarten playing in the sandpit, you know. So 1952, the Queen proclaims herself. And she wasn't Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor, so she was proclaiming herself the Queen under a false name. And she was stripped of all the titles beforehand. So we've done the New Zealand Royal Titles Act 1947, and then when Elizabeth came in, they updated it in 1953. And they've changed the name of New Zealand. They've removed the 140, and they've just called it Onward. But New Zealand's still underlined, and it's still got spaces for ... and everything below it is to be disregarded. And in 1953, there's still no crown. The Maori still has both his feet showing, and the Regina, or Regna, has no feet, so she's still not the Queen of New Zealand. All caps here, ancient Latin, so that's removed off the page. And titles is inset.
Has he got two feathers there now?
He's got two feathers, but they're joined. So what happens is you got one feather, and then you've got two feathers like that, and then you've got two feathers like that in 1974. And the name of Pena Castle means feather. So Feather Castle is Pena Castle, and its twin castle is Eastwood Palace. And they're both built and refurbished by King Dom Ferdinand II of Portugal, who brought Marcos Manuel out from Kensington Palace to Portugal, right? So he's actually marking Pena Castle and Eastwood Palace with the end times work. So what I'm trying to tell you is that they marked Procyon used Queen Elizabeth and Silent Weapons for Quiet War, using the New Zealand titles to mark the New Age, the end times New Age at Eastwood Palace, and that it would have either been done by a Lemurian, which is a New Zealander, or an Australian. And it turned out to be New Zealand, because in the Australian royal titles, there's actually there's two guys on a road going out of Australia towards New Zealand, which is really funny, because that's 1953. What's really funny is that my father actually did that in 1952. But we'll get to that. So it was, anyway, so you've got, this is all caps and then lower caps. You've got small caps. So that's ancient Latin, that's removed. So this and titles is inset. So what it actually says is to assent to an alteration of the royal style, because she has no titles, right? And the royal style is the colour of law style. And then the date is the 20th of April 1953, but that's on italics, which makes it legally ambiguous. So the date's removed off the page. So again, you've got the flag of St George and St Andrew, you've got the three stars here, but the southern star is important. So what they're saying is, the star of the end times New Age is in Lemuria, in the southern hemisphere, in Australia or in New Zealand. He's got two feathers, but they're kind of merged, which means, merged just means not yet clear, right? 1974 it became clear, yeah. And also the Maori guy, he starts off like this, right? And then he moves around like this, and then he moves around like that, right?
And then the next one, 1974, when he moves around like that, his feet are in a position which is specific to Eastwood Palace, and then her feet appear in the same position. Right? So, yeah. So New Zealand still doesn't exist in 1953. It's still called Onward. It was called Onward for Templars, Onward 140, now it's just called Onward. So that's how New Zealand reads here. It's ancient Latin gobbledygook, doesn't mean anything, nothing in English. Make it up. So New Zealand was called Onward until the 6th of February 1974, which is exactly 22 years after King George VI died, and he had a son born in New Zealand, who was the firstborn. He was actually George VII. So New Zealand was called Onward until the 6th of February 1974, and then 78 days later Portugal gets its freedom. 78 equals 8/7. 8/7 means royal. So if you've got a yard, if you've got 8/7 yards, like 1 1/7 yard, that's 8/7 yards, that's a royal yard, right? So when you've got a date like 78 or 87, it means royal. So what they were saying by changing this on the 6th of February, New Zealand Day, 78 days later Portugal gets its freedom, they were saying that a royal or person representing royalty or the end times New Age was going to come from New Zealand, go to Portugal, which is exactly what happened. So onward means moving forth towards a point ahead in time, which is the end times in the New Age. That's what they're saying. They're naming the country, looking forward to the end times New Age. Onward's not double-spaced, but it is all caps and contained in a box. So it is removed off the page twice because it's all caps and it's in a box. But it's removed into another place in another jurisdiction. And that other place in other jurisdiction is Portugal and the United Kingdom. Yeah. And that's indicated by the Royal Titles Act being dictated from England, and Portugal having its Carnation Revolution, its free revolution, 78 days later. So that's how it moves into their jurisdictions. So still in 1953, the Maori has the feet, he's the king from coast to coast. The regnate has no feet. So it's the Royal Titles Act 1974. It's done on New Zealand Day, 6th of February, which really also marks King George VI's death. 22 years earlier. 22 means MM, and MM means Marcos Manuel, so they're marking Marcos Manuel in the United Kingdom, in Portugal, and as King John II of the United Kingdom. So in 1974, we've got a crown for the first time, yeah, and the regnate, or representing the Queen purportedly, is showing her feet, right? So she's 1974, she's actually got a claim to the throne. And their feet are in the same position. And what they're saying here is that New Zealand is underfoot. Yeah? And there's not double spaces here anymore, so it actually reads New Zealand. And what they've done here is when they've got the double space between the W and the Z, they've actually put a dot in there, but they haven't put it full stop, they put it in the midpoint, and they've made it a diamond of it. Yeah? But what's really important is the number of firm fronds here. The number of firm fronds here, they're uneven in length, and they relate to Estoy Palace and the colonnade cross. And here, for the first time, you've got the Maori's got two feathers. So that means Feather Castle, which is Pena Castle in Sintra, just out of Lisbon. And the twin castle, obviously these are twin feathers. So the twin castle is Estoy Palace, which were both done by King Dom Ferdinand II of Portugal. And then Great British, the flag of St Andrew and St George is smaller, and then you've got the 4 stars here. There's not one bigger, but you've got 4 stars there. There's no 4 stars here anymore. Oh, they're there. So they're there. So, here we go. New Zealand is still in a box though, so it's removed off the page into another jurisdiction. I'm suggesting that in 1974, the jurisdiction that New Zealand was removed to is the future. And what Silent Weapons for Quiet War have done is they've taken over New Zealand and they're using it as a model for the future. Right, so all the social engineering testing is done in the isolated test tube shaped country in the South Pacific, which is about 4 million people. It's considered a Western population, and that's New Zealand. New Zealand is a test case for the rest of the world. So if you get to live there for a couple of years and have a good look at society and analyse it, you can actually come over here and tell people what's going to happen. And that's what I did in end of May 2010, and then the Britishers that I was talking to said, within 18 months everything I said that was going to happen had actually happened. So I suggest that the New Zealand here, the jurisdiction that it's removed off the page into, is the future, and particularly the end times and New Age. So this indicates, so both showing their feet, and New Zealand's underfoot. So the Maori and the redneck are sharing the kinship of New Zealand, right? But they're actually also sharing the kinship of the United Kingdom. One day it's a colony, and next day it's an immigration. Yeah. Now their position, their feet are in the position of the 4 degrees of the holiness of the initiation of Jesus. That's what it means, right? David Bowie actually used this. So that's out of the book there, and he's got the foot coming forward there, so you stand kind of, like that. Yeah. So here it is in the book. That's the text part of it, and that's one of Queen Victoria's dolls. She made some of these dolls herself, and there's a 1, 2, 3, 4 degrees there for initiation. Yeah. Right. So the people who did the Royal Styles and Titles, they actually knew what they were doing, right? They absolutely knew what they were doing, and they absolutely knew that they were illustrating a colour of Royal Style thing, right? And they knew that it wasn't real titles because they invented the word "and titles" to make it a quote of a quote of a quote actually. So they knew they were dealing in styles only and colour of Royal Styles. So here's David Bowie, Black Star video, which came out 13 November 2015. Right, so set in reverse. So Bowie knew what he was talking about as well. Bowie was, he was right into the occult. He's worth about £8 million. He's into the occult, so he went right up to the top of the occult. So he was, he had a priority on knowledge. Yeah. So the Royal Styles and Titles Act for 1974 for New Zealand is Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, Queen. Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, Queen. Now that's legally ambiguous. We kind of thought that she was a queen, but now she's a god queen. Yeah? And whenever you've got anything that's legally ambiguous in a legal document, it makes it of lesser importance, or no importance at all. So Elizabeth II, born through the eye of a needle, Queen of New Zealand under other realms and territories, head of the faith, but it says by the grace of God, Queen of New Zealand, which removes it from being a title, removes it from being a style, and renders it at best colour of law. So this is where it really starts to get interesting for me. I actually did this yesterday because I had a whole other 60 slides to show you. But there's sometimes when you get a point and you go, oh yeah, that's interesting. Then you go, what if this? And then I go, wow, they've actually done it, you know. So on the 1974 Royal Titles Act, New Zealand, the fronds here you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and here you've got 8 and 8. So it's 8 out of 7. If you're looking at it from the northern hemisphere, then it's 8 out of 7. Right, so that means royal, 8 out of 7, and that means royal, 8 out of 7. So that means it's 2 royal lines. Yeah? And in Estroy Palace, in the colonnade cross that I left on in the beginning, the interesting thing about that cross is that it has, if you're lying on the cross, right, if you're lying on the cross looking up, this has 2 rows of 7 columns. This has 2 rows of 8 columns. Right? This has got 2 rows of 7 columns and 2 rows of 8 columns. Right? So again, this is marking Estroy Palace. Yeah? And that's Pena Castle, Feather Castle, and that's Estroy Palace. Yeah? And that's the diminished British flag, and that's the 4th star with the slightly bigger Southern Star. So we're really looking at the shared kinship between the United Kingdom and the Maori over Estroy Palace in Portugal. Now from around Estroy Palace, especially Tavera, all of the banks of England and Scotland are funded from there. Right? So this here is actually the origin of the entire banking in Great Britain. Yeah.
Can I ask about the Golden Fleece?
I suspect that, see, this is a trinity of ships, right? In the previous end times New Age, the Jesus and the Marys and the Joseph of Arimathea were escaping betrayal by boats. So there's, the trinity of boats there. But these ones, I don't know.
Because there's an order of the Golden Fleece, and I wondered,
Yeah.
it's very important in Spain. It seems to be a Catholic order.
Yeah, well, see the black ewe lamb means the right to rule the world, right? So, and some of these things are done in the negative. So you've got 4 black stars here, and then you've got 4 white stars here. So that could be interpreted as a black ewe lamb, which is the right to rule the world, under the elbow of the Maori. Yeah. I own a letter from Queen Victoria that says assemble and claim it, meaning assemble and claim to the throne and crown of the United Kingdom, and it's under my arm. You know what I mean? So, these whole things, the whole World Titles Act appears to be a prediction, right? And the whole world is run on predictions, right? It just becomes a bit more interesting when you're a target of one of the predictions, and like a couple of years ago, wow, it seems to be happening, and it just keeps on happening in all these predictions, or looking at these old documents and that, and there's a definite pattern of codification towards the end times New Age and towards a Lemurian. And in the tradition received, it says that a Lemurian writes the story, right, which means they had to come from New Zealand and Australia, New Zealand or Australia or the Pacific Islands. And it appears to be New Zealand, and I'll show you why in a minute. So the fronds are uneven like the columns at Estoril Palace, which predicted the end times. And King Dom Ferdinand II of Portugal, who brought Prince Marcos Manuel from Kensington Palace out to Portugal, he said that there would be no teaspoons in Estoril Palace until the end times. And that was true, I checked. Yeah. So this is Estoril Palace here. From there to there is the palace building. This is a posada, which is a hotel swimming pool. It's quite tastefully done. And this is the colonnade cross there. It's in a small, very tiny town, very, very tiny town. I'm not sure if there's a petrol station. Yeah. There's no big supermarkets. Yeah. So Estoril Palace means a whole lot of things, but it also means resurrection and revival, etc., and also alludes to Isis. So here's the colonnade cross, and here you've got, actually the north is that way, but because we're dealing in a slideshow, I'll put it side on. So that's at 133.3 degrees, 33 degrees. So, you want, it just basically says, if you see this, look at it closely. And that actually goes 10 kilometres to the entrance to the tunnel. And what happened was Melrue was down here, the guys who were running the last End Times New Age thing 2,000 years ago. They lived at Melrue, which is 800 yards or 700 wall yards that way. And they used to come up through the initiation tunnel and get initiated up here. And then when you come down here, you see the view, it's just fantastic. You can see the sea about 10 kilometres away. And most amazing sunsets. It really is quite fantastic. And there's the font for the font titles there. And these columns, you've got 8 columns there, 2 rows of 8 columns, 2 rows of 7 columns, the same as in fronts on the New Zealand titles. Right? So that's an illusion. Now, if you go through there, you go straight through the centre of the earth and you get to New Zealand. Right? So, but what was really interesting is that to where I was in August 1980, if you go straight through there, you get to where I was, but it's 77 miles off if you're going by degrees, minutes and seconds, and if you're going around the planet by measurement, it's 88 miles off. Right, so they're actually predicting where something would happen in the future, and I've done a lot of research on this place, and they said that cross has been there forever. And I've never seen another colonnade cross anywhere. I don't know, it's sort of in semi-private hands or whatever. But there's 68 columns. What does that mark? When Elizabeth had all of her titles removed on the 26th of March 1953 to her coronation on the 2nd of June, 68 days. Right? So the 68 days was marking the 68 columns, which is, so her titles, her real styles of titles being removed was marking this colonnade, and then this marked me. Right? So what happened is some big, happens every 2,000 years event happened to me in August 1980 at the opposite side of that. 77 miles off or 88 miles off. And then the Priory de Sion were instructed that, well, they found out that it happened because it registers, right? Occasionally, like psychic types of spiritual type events actually register. So they then instructed Elizabeth to instruct Charles to get married, right? So she said, Charles, you've got to get married, have some fairy tale aspect about it, and be a father to some children. That was his brief, right? So he goes to two sisters he had sexual relations with, and they both just got married. So they said, why don't you try a legitimate half-sister, Diana. So Diana was born 77 days before me. And in the high realms, you know, they all know the stuff. They knew it all before me, right? So Diana conceives Prince William on my 20th birthday and gives birth to Prince Harry on my 23rd birthday. What are the chances? So that's the view, and here's the uneven columns. If you go that way, some of the columns are just about that tall. So they're uneven like the fronds on the New Zealand flag. New Zealand Titles Act. So here they're getting really small, they're about that tall, right? So they're uneven, there's 68 columns, the 68 columns mark Elizabeth removed from the titles, and they're marked in the New Zealand World Titles Act 1974. And that's at 133.33 degrees. So Freemasons will look at that and they go, wow, it's 33 twice, and you've got two arms of the cross, it's embracing something. And it was embracing the natural event that happened in 1980, which actually dictated the fall of the House of Windsor. Because Diana had two children, not to Charles, and ended the House of Windsor. Right? So it actually came from here in New Zealand, right through the planet, right? And the idea, I actually haven't got the slide with me at the moment, but if we ever look at, above all the windows here, there's like three pine cones. They're actually in the book, I can show you. There's three like pine trees. But when the sun hits them, that actually reads as 777. Right, so the 777 has been codified in like lollipop Christmas trees, right? And that's done so that people won't get it straight away, right? But 777 means the highest manifestation on Earth, right? The highest representation on Earth. And the other side of the planet to here, in 1980, was the highest representation of the sun. That's what happened, right? So what you've got is the maximum potential for the end times new age. Yeah? So here you've got the highest representation of Earth. Opposite side of the planet, you've got the highest representation of the sun. Yeah? And from then, from 1980 to 2014, it's what, 34 years? Yeah. To the month, actually, because it was 16th of August. Yeah, it's like the same month. Amazing. So yeah, it's kind of one of my favourite places. So yeah, fronds are uneven like the columns at Shore Palace. I've got shared kinship in New Zealand and the United Kingdom. Two feathers is Pena Castle and Stoy Palace. That's actually a duplicate of the previous slide, I think. I've got rid of the original. So there's the codes there, which I've kind of explained. And there's a strip of all the titles on the 26th of March, 68 days before Coronation Day, and that. Then the two castles. 1974 titles, royal titles in New Zealand was a reflection of the 1947 royal titles, and some of the codes were in that, for that. That plus 40 years was the End Times New Age 2014, which is days and years in the Bible, etc. are the same, so 40 days of probation for 40 years. Basically what they've done is they've really linked this in together, right? So you can't make it up, you know, and you can't go back in time and change the graphic on the world styles titles, right? They've timed it and they've done the graphics to show you that this was the big thing. The other side of the planet, and that's just what I've said. Oh, this is actually fan art. Somebody, she sent me this graphic. It was really nice of them. I said, do you want anything added, you know? So I just changed a few things, right? So in Pena Castle, there's a horse there born in 2014. Like, you know, small horse. And it's called, the horse called Portugal. And it's got a map of Portugal on the side of the horse, an exact map of Portugal. So I transferred the exact map of Portugal off the horse called Portugal in Pena Castle Gardens and put it on this line that they put there. And that sword there is out of my knighthood when I was made Lord Chancellor Archer Treasurer over the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of the Duchy of Saxon, Coburg and Gotha, and of Hanover. Right, so they've added a light effect to it, and that's the letter there from Queen Victoria, so I've got it underfoot. That's a letter saying assemble and claim it, right? So I'm allowed to use that letter on maturity, yeah? And there's Pena Castle there, and there's some rocks in the Pena Castle Gardens near the chalet of the Countess. And King John Ferdinand II of Portugal, he was a fantastic collector of plants from all around the world, right? And he collected this Nickel palm from New Zealand, because Portuguese was a great sailing nation, and he planted it in Pena Castle Gardens. So that's it there, and it's the most amazing, huge New Zealand Nickel palm, right? So got a bit of New Zealand, transplanted it in Portugal. It's pretty cool. So what this is the letters patent royal prerogative customary title to the real title, throne and crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And the way they named me, the three highest names is Joseph, and then Nimrod, and then Semiramis, right? So they named me Joseph, so that means the highest name, right? And then Gregory Hallett is an anagram of Holy Grail, right? So that was kind of useful because I can use it. So it was like, you know, it was set up. It was like they set me up. Do you know what I mean? They set me up from birth. They introduced me to King George VI's son in New Zealand in 1967. It was like 5 3/4. The person who did that was Queen Elizabeth and King George VI's doctor. They gave me that name, and then they showed me 40 royal marks from Queen Victoria and said, break these codes, and then they made me Archer Treasurer of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Duchy of Saxon, Coburg and Gotha, and Hanover, and Knight of Hanover, which means I can claim the throne. I've got enough to claim the throne, but now with this Royal Styles and Titles Act and the London Gazette proclamation, Queen's out of the picture. Okay. Cheers.
Right, what was the name of the castle in Romania that the royal Alfie went next to?
What say again?
Do you remember what the name of the castle was that Alfie and Salvi went to in Romania? I was thinking, does it sound like Taylor or something?
Yeah, Pels.
Help.
Pels, yeah. But I'm not sure about the pronunciation. It's like P-E with a squiggle, L-E-S with a question mark upside down on the bottom of the S. You know, so here we get. Do you want a break? Or do you want a break? Okay, and then we'll do Australia later. Smoke a pot.
Debt Free TV, in association with GetOutOfDebtFree.org.